All right, it's now 2 o'clock. I'll call the meeting to order. Members of the committee, members of the public, appreciate you being here today. This is the first subcommittee meeting on the fiscal year 2015 budget. We're going to have two of these meetings, the one today and again on Wednesday. Today will be the Board of Regents represented by Mr. John Brown. And secondarily, we will have a committee hearing on House Bill 697 with Representative Stacey Evans. That'll happen right after Mr. Brown's testimony. Members of the committee, what we're going to do here is he's going to walk through a summary sheet that you should all have there, and as well you should have the tracking sheet. If you have any questions, we can walk through some of the things in the we can walk through the tracking sheet itself if you'd like. I'd like to go ahead and make sure that we take as much time as we need to take a real close look at what the recommendations from the governor's office are, what your own priorities may be, and move from there. So with that, Mr. Brown,
Thank you,
glad to have
Chairman. I bring apologies from the Chancellor. He is in Rome today charging a presidential search committee for the vacancy up there. He regrets not being with you, so you get me instead.
He's working. That's what he's supposed to do. We like you, Mr. Brown.
Yeah. Let me take you through the 15 budget. In your package, I believe you have a one-pager, which is a nice quick summary of everything, and it balances to the numbers in the track sheet. If you're in the track sheet, we're on pages 1 through 5 of the 10. But maybe the easiest way, and then I can go into the track sheet if you'd like, is to look at this one pager. Mm-hmm. If you look in the track sheet, you're going to see several items that appear over and over for each of the activities, and that's under the section that I'm calling here common changes. Those common changes are related to health insurance, retirement, and salary increases, and they affect pretty much all the activities from ag and co-op, forestry, all the way through the institutions. Up in that top section, you'll note that for health insurance, the governor has recommended $14.4 million total for health insurance increases, and this is driven by basically two things. One is we actually have a 3.4% increase in health insurance costs, medical inflation. It is not Affordable Care Act related. There's nothing in with respect to that. This is just normal increase. I'd also mention to you that before we asked for this amount of money for the health plan, we took steps to try to control cost ourselves. We managed to cut $17 million to apply toward this by changing some co-pays, mail order of drugs, and so forth to try to keep the plan in check. But there's the 3.4%, and then we also had a high number of retirees, and since we are self-insured, we have our own health plan. Whenever someone retires, they flip over into our retiree part of health benefits that they carry with them. The reason that that's an additional cost is presumably they were an active employee, they retire and are now here, but their job will more than likely be backfilled, so that's why you have the extra cost from a retiree. So we have $14 million for that. And then there are two items, one for $12.5 million and then one for $347,000. This is related to teachers' retirement system increase and the employees' retirement system increase. Most of our employees are in the teachers' retirement system, and the employer rate is going from 12.28% to 13.15%. This is true not only for us, but K-12 teachers as well. The number was calculated by an actuary to keep the plan sound. So the $12.5 million was the number that corresponds to our employees. And then we have very few ERS employees. Most of those you'd find with archives or Georgia Public Broadcasting, and then a few scattered within the system. That rate's going up as well, but at the time I don't know exactly what it's going from and to, but it's $347,000. And then the last item under the commons that you would see applied to all of the activities is $11.3 million, and that is the salary pool that the governor has recommended. This is approximately a 1% increase, and as it states here and in the governor's book, that this will be awarded based on merit. It's not an across-the-board increase. Our institutions will use it to reward merit to try to either recruit or retain certain key positions. The 1% was calculated as though it would go into effect July 1 of 2014. But again, it'll be a salary pool. We don't know exactly what that would be, but it would probably be something to the effect of maybe a 0 to a 3% pool, and it would be awarded based on whatever criteria. So those are the common items that you'll see under each activity in the tracking sheet. You'll see it applying to ag and co-op and forestry and GTRI, all of them through there. Any questions on that? And I'll note that that's approximately $37 million of the bottom line, $56 million of change.
Members of the committee, any questions about the common changes throughout the tracking sheet? Don't see any. Mr. Brown, continue.
The next section is the items that are related to the teaching program beyond the common changes. And the teaching program is synonymous with the funding formula. Let me note item number 1, where in a typical year you would see us asking for some amount of money and perhaps a recommendation for enrollment change. Honesty compels me to tell you that the system is down in the current year to the tune of 2.8%. This is from enrollment of fall of 12 and through the year. The governor has seen fit to hold us flat rather than subtracting money. He has held us at a 0, so we will carry forward into fiscal 15 with what we had for fiscal 14 with respect to enrollment. I made the pitch, I think, during the bigger hearing that there were some lean years when we were growing, as well as TCSG, where the state didn't have the money. So now this is the other side, and we appreciate that recommendation. We hope it's something that you all will agree with. And as I mentioned, I think when you hear from TCSG later this week, you'll see something similar with them, where their enrollment's in decline and they too were held flat. The next item is maintenance and operations. It is a calculation within the formula that is based on the square footage of buildings that we have. This is the money that pays for the utilities and the upkeep of those buildings. Each year, when any new buildings come online that have been bond funded, that square footage rolls into the formula. In this particular year, we have 2 items. It's broken out. We have $2 million from new buildings coming online. We had 888,000 square feet of space that opened in this year, and that's the $2 million. The second item that you see is a fiscal 14 maintenance and operation calculation correction. Last year, when we were working with OPB, there were some square footage, some buildings that were omitted from the count. It affected us in fiscal 14. That's still there, but going forward into 15 and beyond, the buildings will be counted, and that correction is $6.9 million.
Did you lose buildings?
The next item is payback projects. For those that have heard me tell the story, forgive me, but back in the early 90s, what we would do is if we had a building like a dorm or a parking deck or a dining hall, the state would issue GO bonds, but when they issued GO bonds, instead of using state money to pay the debt service, they would pull the state money out of the regents and in essence have the building pay for the debt service. We kind of discontinued that probably 10 or so years ago, but we're now having some of those original projects retired. This is the 3rd year now that we've had a wave of them, and this is probably the last large year. And it only involves one project. Back in 1995, I believe it was, we built a dorm at Georgia Southern. The debt service on an annual basis was $1 million. The GO bonds are now paid off, and the governor's agreed, according to the way we did it, to restore the debt service out of GO sinking over to the Georgia Southern. The next item is the Georgia Gwinnett. Last year we went through, and I think there was general agreement that there would be a 7-year plan as to how to phase out some of the startup money. This is year 1 of 7. It's phasing out about $9 million over a 7-year period in the first installment, as will the next 6. It's $1.375 million per year. And then the last one is simply a yes that you'll see in a tracking document, and Georgia Awards. That's another name for Race to the Top. we have implemented a student information system that was originally done on a federal grant for Race to the Top. That will continue, but we'll be picking it up and we'll be absorbing that. And so the governor acknowledged that we would use some of our money to continue that effort. So that's the teaching program, the formula portion of our budget, and that's about another $10 million in total. So far we've covered about 46 of the 56 million bottom line. And then that brings me to some miscellaneous other items that are in our budget this year. The first one is archives. The governor has recommended $460,000, an increase for archives to provide for probably 7 positions. It may be 6 or 7 positions, but the ultimate goal here with archives is to get it back open and operating 5 days a week. At one point they were down to a couple of days a week. We've got them back up to 3 to 4 days a week, and this will give us enough positions and operating in order to get them back to at least a Monday through Friday schedule and perhaps part day on Saturday. The next item is Georgia Public Libraries. They are funded on a formula basis that use the state population to provide a certain amount of money for library materials and personnel for the libraries. Based on the population change and running that number through, the number is 106,000. Again, that will pay for library materials and some contribution toward the librarians in the various systems. The third item, graduate medical education. This is a continuation item. It's $3.2 million in the base right now, and this would in essence double it by adding another $3.2 million. To let you know what graduate medical education is about, you may recall a few years ago that at that time Medical College of Georgia, now GRU, as well as a campus in Athens for the Athens branch of the medical school, come along, and we train more physicians now. But the goal is that we're training more physicians, but if we actually want to keep them in the state, data suggests that where they do their residency training is the most important factor. The statistic is usually that one will settle within about 50 miles of where they do their residency training. So we have more graduates coming out of our medical school, but if we want to actually keep them in Georgia, we need a place for them to train here in Georgia. So what we're doing with this money, what's in the base and what's proposed here, is we're identifying hospitals that will do residency training programs. The first 2 years of startup is funded by the state. Eventually it transitions onto Medicare funds and federal funds, as well as some local hospital funds. The first $3.2 million has been expended in order to bring Athens Regional, St. Mary's Hospital on board in the Athens area. We have several hospitals in South Georgia, Phoebe Putney among them, and then we have the other one is Gwinnett Medical Center, that are now starting to have residency training programs and accepting graduates. The $3.2 million that is in addition here envisions Northeast Georgia Medical Center in Gainesville, perhaps being one of them. Redmond Regional, I think Wellstar has interest in doing it, but we would be rolling out trying to identify another 4 to 5 hospitals to bring on. And these hospitals have expressed interest. So the goal here is, with all of the money, is to eventually create 400 new residency training slots, with the idea that we'll be able to keep many of those in state. The next item, Georgia Regents University, medical expansion to Rome. It's one of the special funding initiatives, $784,000. When we did the expansion of the medical school capacity at GRU plus Athens, it was envisioned at that time that we would need several clinical training sites. Macon, Savannah, Albany were among the mix. One of them that was envisioned was Rome. It just wasn't ready yet, but now that we're starting to have the graduates and the larger class sizes, a clinical site in Rome is needed, and in order to provide faculty in the startup for that Rome site, $784,000. The next item, which is also under the special funding initiatives for $1.2 million, is a public relations and outreach initiative that the university system will do in conjunction with the technical college system of Georgia. what this is specifically, the Complete College Georgia initiative, the notion that the state needs to produce more graduates with credentials and degrees. The high school pipeline and your traditional student is probably not going to be enough to meet some of the goals of Complete College Georgia. What we need to do is try to entice a number of individuals who maybe went to school for a quarter or a semester and has 10 or 12 hours but never completed a degree, to try to reach out and bring them back into the systems, be it the university system or the technical college system, and encourage them to complete and get the credentials and the training that they need for the jobs that we'll be going for in the future. I had mentioned during the joint hearings that I don't want this to be mistaken for some of the things that I used to hear when I was working with you. Folks would ask about advertising and seeing all sorts of scattered advertising all over the magazines for one school or the other. This is more of a coordinated approach where it is the two systems together. On a regional basis, you might see the global ad type thing with in the corner the regional institutions, so that, you know, that's how the schools might get a mark on it, but it's a more coordinated overall campaign rather than each institution going out and trying to compete. The $1.25 million the governor has provided, it would pay for everything from potential magazine or newspaper ads to text messaging, mailings, whatever we can do in order to reach folks and get the message out. And the $1,250,000 is probably a fiscal 15 and may be partially continued into 16, and then it should go away in all likelihood. We would at least have the materials developed, and it would be a much lower cost. The next item, Galileo enhancements. If you're familiar with Galileo, that is the Georgia Online Learning Library. It's been out there a while. It's used by the libraries and the university system to share materials. It has been a model system through the years, but it's getting a little dated. So the money here for $2.5 million is largely for two things. One is to kind of refresh and bring Galileo and its base up to date, but probably the bigger aspect of it is trying to get onto Galileo textbooks and open source learning materials so that we might bring down the cost of textbooks for our students. Instead of having the normal textbook, high cost with the royalties going to the author, try to incorporate more open source type things so that students can get their materials there instead of having to go the textbook route. So that's the Galileo deal, and it again is used by our system, TCSG, libraries, and even K-12, and one of the angles on this is that with the expanded bandwidth to the K-12 schools, if Galileo has not been available to some of the K-12 schools, it now will be. The next item is under the Regents Central Office. It is related to the bandwidth and the K-12 initiative of trying to connect each of the school systems with broadband. This provides 4 positions within the university system to try to coordinate among all the education agencies to get the best E-rates, provide training and any kind of technical assistance with regard to that. The governor recommended $415,000. Again, this will span across the education agencies. A lot of it centered around that broadband initiative. The next to last item, SREB payments. This is $28,000. It is the normal increase in the contract rate where we participate with other states. We purchase training slots for fields that are not available in the state. Specifically in this case, we're purchasing training slots for optometry students, most of them either at University of Alabama, Birmingham, or Southern College in Memphis. And then the last item is a pass-through item. It's Georgia Public Telecommunications. I think they participate in one of the statewide systems with regard to personnel called TeamWorks, and OPB's just made an adjustment across the budget for various agencies to reflect real billings. So all of these items total $56 million. That's approximately a 2.9% change from our current funding level. Again, I would emphasize that a lot of it is wrapped up in trying to stay even on health and retirement, and then the governor's pay recommendation, and then these initiatives. And I'd be happy to answer any questions, or if you have something specific in the tracking document. I tried to label this so that you could see for each item down below which program it's in and which item number it is on your track sheet.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Brown. We've got several questions. Members of the committee, he's working off, those of you who may have not heard him in the beginning, the first 5 pages of your tracking sheet, what he went through was the summary there. So let's dig into the tracking sheet and any questions. First question is Chairman Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John, you mentioned on the formula funding teaching program the $6.9 million M&O calculation correction. Did you say you lost some buildings?
No, last year when we turned in our request, there were some buildings that were omitted.
How many?
In calculating. The square footage was a couple of million square feet of space.
But you're
OPB,
you're on top of it now, though, I'm sure.
OPB is working with us, and yes, we have those in. The $6.9 million would have been in our fiscal 14 budget, but it was not. So we're kind of out that money, but going forward, the 6.9 will be there for the lights and the use.
So you keep up with it on square footage, not
Right.
building count.
Right, and we have a itemized list of every building in the system, about yay big, with how much square footage there is, and some just fell through the cracks with the budget calculation last year.
But we're sure you have them all in place now, I'm sure.
I'll give you the whole list.
Okay, thank
Sir.
you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I hate it when you lose a whole building. Representative Chairman Battles. Oh, I'm sorry, that's me. Chairman Battles.
Thank you.
You should be on. 23.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John, do a great job as always.
Thank you.
I have a question. You probably will not have the answer to it right now, but I am interested in. I go back to the previous question about the M&O. Of all the buildings that we have that is owned by the Board of Regents, how many square feet is actually leased out to private businesses, and that we're receiving some kind of income off of that?
First of all, you're right. I can't tell you the number, but if we lease the building out to someone else, we should be foregoing the M&O on it. It should be included in the lease rental pay and come off of the M&O spot. What I'll also mention to you is that anything such as a dorm, a bookstore, or any of those that we refer to as auxiliary enterprises,
Mm-hmm.
the state does not pay M&O on those either. The rental or whatever income those type buildings generate pay for the M&O on those. So we have a total number of buildings, and then there are some that are fenced off that we shouldn't be getting anything for M&O. The only ones that we should get M&O for are the true academic research type buildings.
Okay, thank you.
Next is Chairman Chokas.
John, thank you for your presentation. I've got 2 questions, and the first one deals with the public relations and outreach initiative that y'all are doing jointly with the technical college system.
Right.
And I think it's a great idea, but are there any programs in place or any where you can see measurable results? In other words, will you be able to see an increase in students because of this particular advertisement or for this particular program? Are y'all going to be able to measure that, is my question.
We're still a little bit in the infancy on this. We've worked with a firm who has talked to us a little bit about what the PR campaign might look like. One of the first questions that are presented to us was, if you are successful, how are you going to handle people calling in? What we would envision is that there'll be some sort of, in the ad or what have you, somewhere to direct people to call or inquire. And by way of doing that, I would think that we would start to get a handle on how many are being affected by the ads and whether we're getting that kind of response.
So that when they call in, one of the questions asked to the caller would be, how did you hear about us?
How'd you hear about us? And it may well be that if they call in, it's going to either be direct from the ad or by word of mouth, but we're expecting that we'll need some sort of a call center with people we've already got. We have a shared service center, a call center that will take the calls where folks have heard about us. We'll be able to inquire as to, well, do you have some credit or what have you, which school are you interested in, and then we'll be able to direct them. But by virtue of it being funneled that way, I think we'll be able to get feedback as to whether it's being effective or not.
Perfect. All right. The second question, and thank you, John, for that, is about the SREB payments for optometry. Don't you think it's about time for maybe a school like UGA to be investing in an optometry program?
I think the gentleman knows of what he speaks. Perhaps. We do send between the two schools a number of students. I think we're sending 30 or 40 a year to the two institutions.
Well, thank you. I'd like to see that in the budget next year.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman Chavez. Chairman Rice.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the first line, the health insurance payment, an additional $14 million spread over 1,000 employees. Is that representative of the premium increase per employee?
What you have there, that $14 million, I could break it into two numbers. First of all, about $9 million of it would be normal health insurance, and it affects 66,000 employees. And then there is $5 million that is set aside for 949 retirees and making sure that it's on a pay-as-you-go basis, so it hasn't been pre-funded. So when these folks flip over and we have them in the health plan there, that $5 million goes for their, or is banked for their health. So no, it's 60 some odd thousand for about 9 million of it, and then the remaining is for the retirees.
Okay, thank you. Second question, on my follow-up, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
On the Fund Georgia awards, it's a yes, and it's in the budget at 0. I assume that's a continuing item based upon the formula.
Right.
Fund. Could you tell me how much that basically is, or do you have any idea?
Yes. Georgia Awards is the higher ed piece of a student information system that was developed out of the Race to the Top grant. It initially was funded at about $900,000 by the federal government. For us to pick it up and to continue it will be in the ballpark of $900,000, maybe a little bit less now that it's developed. We can cut back, but that amount, 900 or less, will be picked up by us finding the money somehow to direct into that. And it is an important effort to be able to know where our kids are and where they attended and what happened with them.
And third thing, I've been doing this for a while, but I don't see any bond package associated with this.
I'm going to talk about that here in just a minute.
Okay.
Thank you.
No, I'm sorry, Chairman Burns, I couldn't see you back there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John, the Galileo enhancement is certainly very worthy, but how much do we spend on the service? This is a $2.5 million increase. How much do we spend? You might know offhand.
I need to get the number to you, but I want to say it's in the neighborhood of $5 to $6 million that's in the base for Galileo. And what that pays for is the actual system and subscriptions to various publications, materials. That's what the current amount goes for. But I'll get you the exact number.
I didn't know if it was in the document or not. I just hadn't looked.
It's not.
Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions on the tracking sheet for Mr. Brown? Mr. Brown, I've got a couple questions. On the GRU expansion in Rome, you know the sensitivity to the special funding initiatives. Are you proposing that as a one-time SFA, or is that is that going to be back into teaching? Is that a year-to-year 784? Is there a
I would
estimate?
actually ask that it's going to be 784 that needs to remain in the base. I would actually ask that you perhaps put that in teaching if you decide to go with that recommendation.
Okay, so it is a year-to-year need. I didn't know if this was a startup.
It is. It's year to year. What it pays for is a couple of faculty members and some of the operating that goes with being able to take some students out of these schools and let them rotate through there.
I believe that's also a joint program. Doesn't Georgia Highlands have a piece of that as well, with the Rome campus and the Georgia Highlands? Is that?
Let's just say that the rest of the money for that initial expansion and clinical side is in the teaching program, the formula.
Right.
This piece probably belongs there as well.
That was going to be my suggestion, Buck. You want to make sure we do it. Members of the committee, as you know, I much prefer not to set up things in the special funding initiatives. We don't need to. I mean, we can certainly find them, but the SFIs, I'm trying to phase those out other than a certain one-time.
And along that line, and you're thinking, the other two items that are shown there, GME will go away one day as the federal money kicks in, as will this advertising initiative.
That's what I assumed. I didn't want to move the advertising initiative down there.
Yeah,
I don't think that would go over real well.
It will be there for the 15 budget and perhaps some of it for 16, and then I think it's envisioned that it would go.
Okay. Question, I see Mr. Veach is here from the libraries too. I'm getting a lot of communication with respect to the formula. One thing I've neglected to ask, that formula, the numbers reflected in this budget request are based on the new formula as proposed, and it goes into effect when?
July
1.
Yeah, and I should defer to Lamar, but I believe the old formula and the new formula both involve the same numbers. This 106,000 would be coming whether it was old or new.
Okay.
The new formula simply takes the amount of money and distributes it differently among libraries.
I'm well aware of the distribution
and now
network.
I'll sort of get out of the way. And
Not to members of the committee, I would ask you to take a look at the new formula with the libraries. I don't know if many of you have gotten as much communication as I have. There's a significant. Now, I don't want to be as tried as winners and losers list, but there's a lot of counties that have expectations of certain. I'm not trying to throw you under the bus, Mr. Veach. I'm just you and I have had several conversations on this. So
Let me ask John one more question.
certainly, as soon as I finish the library, you're right back up. I'm not going to take him off the stand yet. Promise you. But we're going to continue that discussion. I've had discussions with the chancellor that I'd like to see some recommendations if we could, just from the regents. I mean, it's really your formula to work out. It doesn't need a legislative remedy, but I'm asking you, please continue to work with us in this committee on that, because obviously I'm not the only one getting those communications, and I know Mr. Veach, you guys have worked hard on that formula, but we didn't hear about it until our constituents. The one they will tell you one thing and they will tell us another on that from our libraries. We all know how that works. Okay, back to you, Chairman Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John, back to the Regent's office for positions to provide E-rate training. I'm sure the rest of the committee knows what E-rate is, but I do not.
The federal government provides a subsidy for education purposes for bringing down the cost of internet connection and so forth. It's called the E-rate. Go ahead.
Oh, it's a library thing?
It goes to schools and libraries, but it's part of the 1996 Telecommunications Act, and it's a little bit of a charge on everybody's phone bill that goes into a pot, and out of that pot comes subsidies for schools, libraries, and I believe rural hospitals to reduce the cost of internet service, particularly in rural areas. And our public libraries depend on that up to the tune of about 3 to 1.
So this is for you, Lamar, right?
No, this is for,
We got to train the regents too?
For schools, it's mostly for schools. That's the biggest amount of it. But yes, the public libraries rely extremely heavily on that for broadband internet service.
Okay.
Let me tell you why I think the 4 were put with us as part of that bigger K-12 initiative to extend broadband to each of the 180 school systems by way of the system we've had, PeachNet. We're sort of the overseers of PeachNet, and in some cases we're going to have to negotiate with some local providers to get from the system office to the schools. And so this activity is kind of centered here because of the PeachNet thing and this whole initiative in order to make sure that we reach out everywhere that needs broadband and the 100 megabits
Okay.
of reach.
Further up question, Mr. Chairman, if I may. I've had several people mention to me the university system does not take credit cards. Can you tell me why? I think does technical colleges take credit cards, Laura?
We take credit cards by way of a third party.
Third party.
Third party. If you have a tuition bill, a third party will pay us, and then you, by way of credit card, will pay the third party.
What do they charge for that?
It's usually about 2.75%.
So they charge it back to the student.
Convenience fee.
So, but all colleges are taking credit cards?
They do, except the one that we've had issue with, I think Visa is not accepted because we've had problems with Visa negotiating based on a percentage versus a certain share of the bill. I don't know the exact reason for it, but we've had some things where Visa's terms are different than a MasterCard or a Discover's, and we haven't been able to break through on that one.
Who is the third-party vendor we use?
It varies. The one I'm most familiar with is called TouchNet and PayPath. You want to pay your tuition, you log on to the site, and then you say you're ready to pay. It'll take you to the PayPath site, sort of like a PayPal.
Yeah.
And then they'll cut the deal here, and then they get their money from you. That keeps us out of perhaps having any bad accounts or anything. The third party will cover that.
The hacking part of it.
We get our money, and that way the third party's on the hook to chase somebody down.
So the truth of the matter is you do take credit cards. Okay. Thank you.
Representative Atwood.
Thank you. You do a great job, as always. You may not be able to answer this, but just something that's been on my mind. You mentioned holding down the cost of textbooks, and I've heard that complaint from some of my constituents. Would you know, and I'll certainly get with you offline or talk to whoever I should, maybe Dr. Veach may know, back when I went to college and graduate school and law school on several occasions, and I'm sure it was back during the time of quill pens, but I had several of my professors that required me to purchase that singular professor's book, which always irritated me at the time. And I'm not sure this needs a legislative approach, and I certainly want to encourage professors to publish, but is there a prohibition within the university system of Georgia, do you know, to prohibit that or to give the proceeds to someone else? I want a balanced approach to professors requiring textbooks.
I don't know if we have any prohibition, Tom. We don't have any such prohibition, but the situation that you're explaining is part of what we want to get to with Galileo. We think that with online learning and MOOCs and some of the way of the future as well as the present, that there are materials that can be assembled for a particular class that are available either free of charge or much less than textbooks, and making those available through some sort of a network like Galileo.
Well, I applaud you doing that. Those textbooks were prohibitive. They were even back during my time.
Representative Atwood, one thing, I'm going to try to get this scheduled with this accelerated schedule in the snow week. A couple of the presentations that I wanted to have are somewhat falling by the wayside. One was going to be a presentation on the advisement procedures, and I was going to ask Georgia State's president to take a look at that because they've done such a great example. Many of the institutions are doing this, but they're one of the pioneers in that on a cost-saving side. But the other, and I'm going to still try to schedule this one as well, is GPB has done, and if you'll remember some of the members of this committee, we put $500,000 into a program almost 3 years ago on the 8th grade history textbook, and the work that they've done there is spectacular. They have created a system, and if we can somehow find a way to get it, I know the Regents has their own committee. I think Chairman Wilhite was actually pushing this, is to some of these electronic texts. They're going to save the state of Georgia $3 to $4 million every 3 years just on that one text. And if we can work this through the Regent system, I mean, those of you who pay tuition, these parents will hold a parade for us if we can bring down the book side. Fees are problematic, but the books are, anybody's paying $1,200, $1,400, $1,600 a semester for those books, and they are. I'm with you on that. I'm going to hope this committee can see what GPB is doing on that we can try to put, I mean, they are attached to your budget unit. They've done some brilliant work. What they've done there is probably one of the greatest learning tools I've seen the state do, and we got it for the cost of less than many things that we do in here. Let's just put it that way. So I hope to bring that too. And it's not that the Regents hasn't done work towards this. Just it's a bigger institution, many more professors, and those professors that write books can do them electronically, just as easy as they can do the other. I'm sorry for the long-winded explanation, but I do want you to know I'm trying to schedule those two things, and I'll get you some information as soon as I can schedule those two. Next is Chairman Rice.
Yeah, just one more question here, John. In the merit-based pay, employee recruitment and retention is $1 million increase on that on the state fund side. That's really not the question. The question really has to do with the teaching budget at 40-18. That appears to be where the large amount of federal funds comes in, $4 billion worth of federal funds.
Yes.
Am I reading that correctly?
Yes. The teaching. And the teaching program is where most of your sponsored research federal grants come in.
Okay.
So
but the current formula you're using, you're not into the new formula methodology yet, but the current formula you're using provided a basis for calculating the teacher or professor pay effectively in this whole thing. Are there increases in professor pay in here, and are they in the federal side of the budget, or are they in the state side? How does that work? I'm not really sure.
Yeah. If you look on page, let me find the teaching program.
So on
if you look
page
on page 3 of 10,
yeah,
and at the very last item, 40.18.3, you see $10 million there,
right.
and that's all state funds. And then there are the similar line through the rest of the budget for some of the other activities, but the bulk of it is this $10 million. That is the equivalent of a 1% pay raise if you went across the board for all state-funded salaries and employees in the system. If anyone's on a other fund basis or a sponsored research grant basis, they're not included in that base calculation. And as I mentioned, of this $10 million, while it is the equivalent of a 1% across the board, it will not be awarded that way. It'll be somehow pooled up, and you'll say that employees may be eligible for, say, 0 to 3%, and those that are not merit-worthy are here, and those that are somewhere in between. And so it'll be merit, and then there'll be attention paid to trying to use it to keep some of the best faculty where it's a competition situation. But that's how we'll do it. So it's all state funds, state employees, and then with respect to some sort of equity or what we do, we'd have to look within those research grants to see if it allows for that.
And so the $4 billion is basically sponsored funds in terms of research grants.
Right. About 3-point-some-odd billion of that $4 billion is sponsored grants, and then there are a couple of other student fee-related things, but most of it's the research.
In the way that the professors allocate their time, and are there what I guess the percentage of the faculty that's really here on sponsored funds as opposed to what we're paying in terms of teaching grants?
Right. And you'll find a particular faculty member that may have 25% of their time state and 50% sponsored, and then some other 25% billed to something else. So it's not always a clean federal or sponsored versus a clean state. Sometimes it's a mix.
And one more question. Sequester endangerment for any of these funds?
No. I say no in that I don't think that there's anything still out there now with the latest budget deal that's a serious threat at
Moved
one
it to
point.
16 anyway, so there's no, the
Yeah.
federal piece moved it out to 16, so it shouldn't affect.
With the budget agreement earlier this year, I haven't heard that anything's still in real jeopardy, but at one point, yeah, there were some grants for tech in Georgia and GRU that we had to work around. But at the moment, I think we're okay.
Thank you.
Any more questions for Mr. Brown from members of the committee? Okay, members of the committee, a couple pieces of housekeeping. First, I want to address Chairman Rice's question about the bonds. As you know, with respect to this committee, the Speaker and the Chairman of the committee generally like to keep the bonds as a part of the final budget recommendation from the big committee. What we've done in the past is each individual member of this committee, if you'll look at the track record, you'll see that they've had a very good track record with respect to success on the projects. The chairman and myself and any members of this committee are meeting daily with the individual presidents of the institutions or those who are interested in the bonds. And generally what has happened in the last few years is that we're considering minor projects. The governor has recommended, and it generally works out this way, that was fairly historic as well, going back 4 or 5 governors even before that. That's as far as I know. But the governor's office generally recommends the major projects, and the House and the Senate will recommend projects of a smaller stature. So if you will continue to bring those, sit down, we'll discuss it with your president, and then with the chairman of the committee and with the speaker, and then they will make that recommendation. Does that answer the question with respect to that? That's how they've ask us to go. But if you will look, this committee has an inordinate amount of, because you understand the university system, the speaker and the chairman of this committee take into consideration your knowledge of this, the budgetary, you hear these budgets, so more likely than not, this committee's recommendations, individual members' recommendations are given a significant priority. I think you'll see that over the last few years as well. Does that answer the question on that?
Thank you.
Okay, secondarily, schedule-wise, you see that we have a Wednesday schedule as well. That'll be our second day of hearings. That will be for the Technical College System of Georgia and the Student Finance System. The tentative schedule is that the Chairman England would like us to take a vote on this budget more than likely Monday week. So we'll have time. If you have any recommendations, changes that you'd like to suggest between now and Monday, let's have a conversation with respect to that with not only myself but other members of the committee and Chairman England, and we'll bring back a proposed tracking sheet for that recommendation next Monday. We won't tell Mr. Brown what we're going to recommend until that point. We'll let him get the surprise. Any other questions with respect to schedule? Any other issues on that? All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Brown.
Thank you.
Okay, members of the committee, if you will please stay. We have what I think, well, not only because I co-signed this bill with Representative Evans, a very important proposition. Representative Evans is going to present to us House Bill 697. This is a HOPE grant bill. She and I and the governor's office have worked diligently over the last 3 or 4 months to come to a what I think is a significantly elegant solution to some of the issues that have arisen. And I'm very appreciative of Representative Evans, my Cobb County colleague, and I just want to state for the record the differential between how this works and how Washington works ought to be a national prototype for how people can work across lines and come together for a solution without anybody expecting any credit, without anybody expecting any politics out of this whatsoever. And I'm appreciative of our governor and Representative Evans, and this is a very important issue with our HOPE grants. And I'm going to turn it over to Representative Evans. We'll go into the hearing portion of this. I'll ask you for a motion after the discussion on Representative Evans's bill. So, Representative Evans, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We could perhaps teach a class.
Wouldn't hurt, would it?
Exactly, on how to get it done. I'm bringing before you today, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, HB 697, and before I get into the discussion of the bill, I do want to echo the chairman's comments and say thank you back to the chairman. for all of his help on this bill as a co-signer, and just we've been working on this. This has been a year in the making, basically, this bill, a lot of work behind the scenes. So thank you to the chairman, to Chairman Rogers, Chairman Smyrie, who I know had to leave, members of TCSG, the governor's office. This was truly a team effort, and I think we're bringing before you today a very good bill that I hope that you will all agree is elegant, to coin your word, take your word. The bill as originally drafted and sponsored by the chairman proposed that we take the HOPE grant, again this is a bill dealing just with a grant, not with a scholarship, that we take the HOPE grant back to covering full tuition for our technical college students. Through the work over the last year and working with the governor's office and others, we have come up with, again, an elegant and productive compromise to reward our highest performing students in our technical colleges and give them some relief from the monetary woes of trying to pay for tuition. And what we are proposing in the committee substitute, which I think you all have before you, or
You should have that. It's LC 33-5447-ER-ECS.
and what the substitute does is creates a Zell Miller grant scholar category. Y'all all know that for the scholarship that goes to our four-year college and university students, they have an opportunity to become a Zell Miller scholar and receive full tuition at our four-year colleges and universities if they meet certain GPA and SAT score criteria. What this does is create that higher level at the technical colleges, and so for students earning a 3.5 GPA in the technical college system school, they will receive the difference between what their regular grant would cover and what their tuition is. And just to answer the question, why do we need this? Georgia is not unlike a lot of other states in this country that's experiencing a skills gap. We need people to fill the jobs that our technical colleges train students to fill, and we can't have those graduates and those people on the assembly lines driving trucks, working in hospitals and many other places if we don't have students in the seats at the schools. And because of the price sensitivity of this population of students in higher education, they need our help bridging that gap between what we're currently covering with the HOPE grant and what their tuition is. Why not offer more relief for students in our four-year colleges and universities? Maybe that's a question in your mind. Again, we have this special category in our four-year colleges and universities, but I would also just inform the committee, to the extent you don't know, that when we made the changes that we made in 2011, there were effects felt, unintended consequences felt, that were felt differently among the systems. We lost over 20% of our technical college students, as opposed to losing less than 3% of our four-year college and university students. And what that represented in funding for the systems was a loss of over 60% of the HOPE funds for the technical college system versus about 20% loss for the four-year colleges and universities. So y'all know this better than anybody down here, but you know that the technical college system needs our help. These students need our help, and our economy needs these students. So this bill is aimed toward bringing some relief there for everyone. The cost, that may be another question in your mind. We had a fiscal note on the original version of 697, which again was to cover every grant recipient with full tuition, and there were a couple different estimates, but in round numbers we were talking about somewhere around $30 million. So the compromise language that we're doing here to create this category of the students with the 3.5, that's representative of about 20% of our current enrollment in technical college systems. So you can take 20%. I mean, don't quote me. I hope nobody's going to PolitiFact me on this, because I don't know if my math's going to be exactly right, but approximately 20% of approximately $30 million is approximately $12 million. So that's the cost that we're talking about here. And our lottery is very healthy right now. I know some folks are here in the audience. They're doing a great job over there, returning money to our education fund. And I believe I'm right to say that their projections and even the increases that they've made into the education fund over the last couple of quarters will cover the cost of this. So we're not spending outside of our means here. And then finally, a concern that some of you may have that I want to address is, well, one of the reasons that we made the changes that we did in 2011 was to keep, perhaps in some folks' mind, was to keep tuition down at these systems. We wanted to make sure that there was an incentive for them to keep costs down. And if you look at tuition costs per semester or quarter hour at the technical college system before 2011 and after 2011, you'll actually see that the increases in their tuition came when we started limiting the tuition under the grant. So it's exactly the opposite effect. If we can keep enrollment a little bit higher, they will not have the need to raise tuition, and this allows that to happen. So I think it's a good bill all around. I can't think of any reason that anybody would not want to support this bill, but having said that, reasonable minds do disagree, and I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
Thank you, Representative. Just a couple other comments. I did not get a chance to thank both the Georgia Lottery, who's also here, and the Student Finance for working together on this. The other thing I'd like to let everyone know is, if you'll remember during the Governor's State of the State address, he laid out an entire program for this, mentioning the work that Representative Evans has done with respect to the Zell Miller Scholar and this bill. He also set up two separate categories. They're in your tracking sheet for you'll hear about these tomorrow from TCSG when they make their presentation. But if you look at pages 6 and pages 7 of your budget tracking sheet, you will see on 4472, the increased funds for the Strategic Industries Workforce Development Grant. That's $5 million. If we remember, we had 3. We're going to 7. And I didn't write them down, so I probably can't. Ms. Gamage, do you want to try to give me the 4 that we're adding?
The 4 new ones are welding, healthcare technology, people employment and information technology, and the 3 existing were truck driving, practical nursing, and early childhood that are already in the budget.
Thank you very much for saving me on that, members of the committee. I wish I'd written those down. But those are higher demand programs, and the increases is that the governor's office has certainly seen a demand for that. Secondarily, and I think, Representative Evans, this is a piece that you and I have talked about with closing that gap. On page 7, you'll find the low. Again, we're doing a lot of the same things we're doing in the Hope Scholarship arena for public universities. We're tracking that, the low interest loans for technical colleges, the 1% loan program for that. There's a $10 million that the governor has recommended in that. I think that if to close that gap, if the differentials in some of the grants and some of the dollars that are out there are not there, this loan can help to close that gap as well. It's another $10 million. So it's a comprehensive overview of the types of things that this governor, members of this House, are trying to do to support our technical college system, because as you've seen, if nothing else, their metrics are significant. 98% of their graduates leave the system and they have actual real jobs, and these are retraining our constituents who may have lost their jobs. It's a great system. They do a good job, and I'm appreciative of Representative Evans for bringing this bill. Any questions of the committee? Well, he did a good job explaining it then. All right. All right. At the appropriate time, then, Representative Chokas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to move that this committee give a due pass recommendation for HB 697 LC number 335447ER-ECS.
Okay, the motion has been made and seconded. That was Representative Smith down there from Chairman Smith down there from Columbus. Okay. Any other discussion? Anybody else?
No, I just personally like to second it. So.
Okay. Well, seconded by Representative Jones as well. So we have 2 seconds. I'll take that. All right, members of the committee. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? A unanimous representation, Representative Evans. Congratulations. Members of the committee, any other further business before the committee? Anybody? Well, thank you very much. Meeting adjourned.